The Advocate for Success. Season 1, Episode 3, Champion. Produced by Elton Thomas. While I attended the Missouri School for the Blind, I participated in many sports, like track and field, swimming, and wrestling. My junior year, I was on the wrestling team with my older brother, Jason. He was in the weight class below me, which was the 145-pound weight class. I was in the 152-pound weight class. Our conference was made up of blind schools from surrounding states, and at the end of the season, all blind schools would meet at the final conference tournament to compete. Early that season, we had a meet in Illinois, where Jason had a match against an opponent we will call Jackson. In the first period, Jackson and Jason moved non-stop, both of them getting takedowns and scoring points on each other. In the second period, Jason almost pinned Jackson, but Jackson was able to pop out of the pin. Then Jackson took Jason down, where he was flat on his stomach. Then Jackson quickly grabbed Jason's right bicep with both hands clenched, then stood up bringing Jason's arm up behind his head. His arm is not supposed to move that way. It was an illegal arm bar called a chicken wing. Jason let out a grueling yell, and the referee took 1 point away from Jackson for the illegal move. It was hard to watch as Jackson pinned my brother with ease, because of his injury. Later that evening at a social, I overheard Jackson bragging about taking a calculated risk with the chicken wing move. He did not want to have to worry about my brother in the conference tournament. After Jason visited the doctor, found out his muscle had been torn, and had to sit out the rest of the season. Sadly, it was Jason's last year to participate in the conference. What happened to my brother seemed so wrong, in so many ways. At first, I was angry. I pictured myself getting payback for my brother, but then I realized, that will accomplish nothing. The only way I could get Jackson to regret hurting my brother, would be to find a way to keep him from winning the conference tournament, which means that I would have to face him, and beat him.
The conventional definition of the word, champion, is simply to be the winner of a competition, who has defeated all rivals. Another, perhaps more profound definition, is someone who fights for a cause, on behalf of someone else. Elton is faced with a dilemma. On one hand, Elton faced little competition in the 152-pound weight class. He could just forget about Jackson, and worry about his own goals of winning the conference. Furthermore, Elton knows that Jackson is much more strong and experienced. Thus, if Elton did face Jackson in the conference tournament, it would likely result in Jackson beating Elton with little effort. On the other hand, Elton feels he needs to do something. He tosses and turns at night, remembering the match where his brother was injured. It plays like a repeated recording in his head. Sometimes, the definition of champion can be both meanings. To defeat a rival, in support of a cause, on behalf of someone else.
There was a large mid-season tournament at the Indiana School for the Blind and Visually Impaired. This would be my only chance to observe Jackson's wrestling style. A wrestler from one school moved up to my weight class. He was too afraid to wrestle against Jackson. So, Jackson only had 2 matches that day, so I was sure to watch both of them. When there is a blind wrestler in a competition, they start the opponents off touching hands at the fingertips, with one hand over, and one hand under. As Jackson and the other wrestler took their stances, Jackson ducked his head and body low below the hands. And the split second the referee blew the whistle to start, Jackson lunged at his opponent's legs, grabbing both of them in a double leg takedown. Jackson pulled his opponent's legs right out beneath him, as his back slammed hard against the mat. The opponent stood up slowly, and the referee checked if he was alright to continue the match. This time, Jackson grabbed his opponent's right wrist, and swept into his right leg, and picked him up in a fireman's carry. Jackson then proceeded to run around the outer perimeter of the ring, carrying his opponent on his shoulder. After Jackson set him down, he then let his opponent try taking shots at his legs, and then would put his opponent in a cross face, a move where you place your forearm across your opponent's face for control. It appeared that Jackson was just toying with his opponent, and relishing in an easy win. In the second match, Jackson started with the same stance. This time when he dove in he picked up his opponent, while on one knee, slammed him hard, and pinned him quickly. This was one of the fastest pins I've ever seen. The conference tournament is just a few weeks away, at the Tennessee School for the Blind, in Nashville.
Elton is not sure if he should try to face Jackson at the conference tournament. If Elton does drop the weight to the 145-pound weight class, then he may lose the strength he needs to even have a chance of winning against Jackson. And if Jackson wins, or even worse, injures Elton, then there would be nothing gained. Perhaps Elton should just worry about himself, which had been a suggestion from one of his teammates. Elton imagines himself picking Jackson up and slamming him, pinning him quickly. But somehow, that fantasy does not seem fulfilling. Elton ponders on what he truly wants to accomplish from facing Jackson. Elton thinks to himself, I just want Jackson to understand that it's not okay to intentionally hurt other people for personal gain. Whether or not Elton wins or loses, Jackson will understand that his actions are noticed by others, which will have to be good enough. Or will it?
I remember focusing on getting back into my routine after the mid-season tournament, which I did get first place in the 152-pound weight class. Right after school, I would run to my dorm room, change into my running clothes, then proceed to the basement, where we would run laps in the hall before practice, 22 laps per mile. Our wrestling coach, Deke Edwards, would encourage us to run with effort. To run the first mile fast, then survive the second and third mile. We would then do sit-ups, push-ups, and pull-ups in the wrestling room. Then, we would do drills and wrestle each other in matches. I would typically stay at practice until dinner time, and then go straight to the dining hall for dinner. After dinner, I would spend an hour at the library in study hall, to catch up on homework, or study with classmates. Then after dinner I would typically go back down to the basement and run some more. For the first couple of weeks I could not make up my mind, 152 or 145. Should I diet and exercise more, or enjoy the fact that I could make the 152-pound weight class with ease? 1 week before the conference tournament, I saw my brother, Jason. He was walking to class, his books held in one arm, and his other arm in a sling. And that's when I made my final choice, of which weight class I would wrestle.
Elton attended the Missouri School for the Blind when he was 13 years old. His public school, in DeSoto, Missouri, did not have the tools that Elton and his brother Jason needed to succeed in the classroom, with their blindness. At first, Elton was not interested in joining any sports team, but Jason jumped right into sports at the school. Elton then eventually joined the swim team and the track team. Wrestling though, well, that just sounded too dangerous. After school one day, Elton overheard teachers talking about the wrestling coach, Mr. Edwards. Mr. Edwards was the only coach at the time who was blind. Furthermore, he had an incredible wrestling career, and was even in the Wrestling Hall of Fame. Elton joined the wrestling team, and at his first practice, a teammate was teaching him how to do a single leg takedown. To go down on one knee, and quickly grab one leg with both arms. When Elton dove towards the leg, his ear hit the kneecap of his teammate. It hurt so bad, Elton started crying, and the assistant wrestling coach brought him to the health center. It was just pain, and nothing was injured. But Elton quickly quit the team. He joined back to the team a few weeks later, but only wanted to practice, and not compete, which was okay with the wrestling coach. The next season, Elton's freshman year, he felt more confident, and entered his first competition. Before the match, Mr. Edwards spoke to the opponent's coach, the opponent's coach spoke to the opponent. When the referee blew the whistle to start, Elton ran towards his opponent, swinging his arms randomly, and his opponent held Elton back by placing his hand on his head, yes, just like how you see in the cartoons. It was so comical, Jason told Elton after the match, but everyone was proud of him for taking that first step in becoming a competitor. Elton did win 2 matches that season. Elton's sophomore year he got discouraged and quit the team. He just decided to stop going to practice. Mr. Edwards went up to Elton's dorm room, sat at the foot of his bed, and told Elton that he has to learn how not to give up on things, because they are hard. Mr. Edwards would share his story from time to time, about how he lost his vision when he was 15 years old. He lived on a farm, a shotgun went off and got him in the face. Elton noticed that Mr. Edwards would always say, "Thank goodness the only thing I lost was my vision." Many people would likely say, "I lost my vision, my life is over." Elton finds Mr. Edwards' outlook on life profound. Elton also learned about sportsmanship from Mr. Edwards, that it's all about how you define winning.
Nashville, Tennessee, the evening before the conference tournament. I step up onto the single beam scale. The referee slides the gauge back and forth until it balances. He then writes down a number in the book and announces, 144.5, you will wrestle the 145-pound weight class. As I walked away from the scale, my stomach started rumbling, a lot. Truly, this is what it must feel like to have butterflies in the stomach. Or perhaps, I was starving from dropping weight, and needed to get some dinner. At dinner, my teammates wished me luck. They were not sure if I would actually go through with dropping to Jackson's weight class. But they were in full support with my decision. That evening there was a social. As I walked around, some members of other teams began talking to me. They said they heard about me dropping to Jackson's weight class, and hoped that I teach him a lesson. Even a member of his own team described him as a bully. They somehow felt that I was standing up for them. The following morning, I had a banana and orange juice for breakfast. That was my typical competition day start. The breakfast hall was eerily silent. You could tell that everyone had their matches for the day on their mind. The competition started shortly after breakfast. My first match was not until mid-morning due to the lack of competitors in my weight class. About 15 minutes before my first match, I did my typical warm-up by jump roping. I made the pin close to the end of the first period. I warmed up for my second match right before lunch. Again, I made the pin close to the end of the first period. I decided not to watch any of Jackson's matches that day. I already had my strategy worked out, and did not want to second-guess myself. My competitor in the semi-final was a bit tougher, and I made the pin about halfway through the second period. Late that afternoon were the final matches. I watched each weight class as they moved up to mine. Then they made the announcement, Jackson versus Elton. I put down my jump rope and walked to the center of the mat while snapping my headgear in place. Jackson and I did a quick handshake, and took our stances while touching fingertips. Jackson took a staggered stance, similar to a running stance, with his head low. I took a square stance with both legs right in front of him, with my head held high. The referee asked us if we were ready, and we both said yes. The referee looked at me in my vulnerable stance and said, "Are you sure you are ready?" And I said, "Yes, I am." The split second the whistle blew, Jackson dropped and lunged at my legs. At the exact same time, I jumped upward, kicking both my legs out from him. He missed my legs and I was able to spin in the air behind him, and got the first takedown. Jackson then stepped away from me, then turned and faced me. As we stood face to face trying to trip and throw each other, I dangled my right arm, and Jackson immediately grabbed it, dropped to pick me up in a fireman's carry. He then proceeded to carry me around the perimeter of the mat. He then dropped to one knee to try and slam me, but I was able to get out of it. I remember thinking to myself, do not let him get behind you. A few more times he lunged at me, and I was able to evade and get behind him. He picked me up another time towards the end of the first period, and carried me around the perimeter of the mat, and I was able to get out of it before he slammed me again. In the second period, I did not do the square stance again, but did do a southpaw stance to try and throw him off. A southpaw stance is like the staggered stance, only the right foot is in front instead of the left foot. At the whistle, he reached down to grab my right leg, and at the exact same time, I switched legs, cross-faced him, and was able to get behind him for another takedown. I was able to break him down to his stomach, and tried to turn him to his back with a half Nelson, but he was too powerful and got out of it. Jackson then stood up and faced me. He picked me up again with a fireman's carry, and carried me around the perimeter of the mat. I could hear him breathing heavily in exhaustion. And then the period was over. In the third and final period, the referee blew the whistle, and this time, Jackson just stood there. I thought about shooting in for a single leg, but then decided not to. Mr. Edwards had taught me that the second most used move to a takedown to a single leg is a counter to a single leg. I dangled my right arm again, and in a fury, Jackson picked me up in another fireman's carry, only this time. He ran to the edge of the mat, and threw me towards my team's cheerleaders. I landed on my head, and rolled over to my back. The referee held up some fingers and asked me how many he was holding up. I told him that since I was blind could not tell, so he let me continue. The split second the referee told us to start, Jackson lunged at my legs again, and again I was able to evade and get behind him for a takedown. The referee then blew the whistle and stopped that match. I was confused as the referee had us stand side by side, then held up my hand as if I won the match. I walked to my coach, and he said congratulations. Then I asked what happened. Then Mr. Edwards asked me how hard I hit my head, and that I won the match by the 10-point rule. Jackson scored 3 points, and I had 13 points.
At the awards ceremony later that evening, Elton received the medal for first place, and Jackson received the medal for second place. Afterwards, Jackson approached Elton and shook his hand. Jackson then asked, "How did you beat me?" Elton then answered, "I let you pick me up until you became exhausted, and I avoided doing risky moves on you. But to be honest, if you had not hurt my brother, you probably would have won this conference, and you need to stop being a bully to your peers, as they will never forget how you treat them." It was at this moment that Elton truly felt like a champion. You would think that Elton would have felt like a champion when he won the final match against Jackson. However, Elton did not compete here to win the conference. He competed to win his brother's honor, and discovered that he won the honor of everyone that Jackson had bullied, and most importantly, he earned the honor of Jackson himself, who became a more respectable wrestler from that day forward.